Well, church, just because we're online, I don't expect that our habits are changing. Some of you are coming to church late, and welcome right now. It's so good to have you. So we are Church Online, and if you go to the website, you're going to see a screen like this, and you're going to be able to watch Church Online. And if you click on the little chat note down at the bottom, you'll have an opportunity to chat. And some of our pastors and ministry staff would love to connect. It's a way to connect with one another, and it's just another way for us to be able to stay connected together. You know, one of the drawbacks of Church Online is that we don't get to see you. You get to see us. We don't get to see you. But last week, a couple of people actually posted or sent us some pictures of them having church, and there was a screen, and they were in their house. And so here's a challenge we want to throw out there right now. If you want to take a picture right now of you, your family, you in your pajamas. I know you don't have your makeup on. I know you haven't shaved, but hey, we're all about being real. And if you do want to put it on a story, make sure you tag it at Riverwood CC, and we'll be able to see each other and kind of share some of those posts together. That'd be great. Also want to let you know that every day we are going to be having something called 2 or 3 at 6:20, and 2 or 3 is based on Matthew 18:20, where it says 2 or 3 are gathered together. I'm there in their presence, and so every day one of our ministry staff or pastors is going to be posting a 2 or 3 minute inspiration story, kind of check-in together. It's a way that we can, you're getting all sorts of technical medical news. We want to inspire your spirit as well. We're going to do that every day. So about 10 years ago, Carolyn and I discovered cruising, as in Caribbean cruising. Love the palm trees, love the weather. We started out with 2 or 3 or 4 night cruises and kind of got to enjoy them. So we ended up kind of extending it to a 7-night cruise. And everything was going fine until I started getting seasick on these cruises. So I used the patch and all that sort of stuff. And one year in particular, we decided that we would take a particularly gentle cruise. And so we went with a cruise line that is known for seniors and kind of being a little bit of a slower pace. And so we went on this cruise. It was going to be to celebrate Carolyn's 45th birthday. And all I remember, here's what I remember of this special birthday cruise. I remember walking to this beautiful, glorious gold embossed dining room. And we were walking down this grand hallway, and all these seniors with their walkers were going from one side of the cruise ship to the other down this hallway with the waves, and they're having a blast. I mean, they were having so much fun, and I was so annoyed by these seniors. And the reason I was annoyed was because here they were having a great time, almost like this crazy conga line of seniors having a great time, and I, a much younger, much stronger, much more able man, was needing to be helped along by my wife because I was so pale. I was feeling so seasick. And we went to the dining room, and I remember she ordered filet mignon. I ordered a lobster. Couldn't eat any of it. We were going to go to a special show that night. I remember laying in the bed, moaning and groaning, and she went to her birthday show that night. She was sitting in the bed listening to the drum beat from the theater above us, and that was our experience. It's very interesting that two people can have the very same experience or circumstances and yet have two very different responses. And so when we think of that, it actually makes me think of roller coasters. And this is where Carolyn and my experience actually flips around. I don't have any good stories of Carolyn on a roller coaster because she refuses to get on a roller coaster. But when you look at two people and having the same ride and the same experience, there's often two very different experiences. Take a look at this. One person's having a blast. The other is absolutely freaking out. Same roller coaster, same experience, two different responses. One is going to be having so much fun. The other is crying like crazy. And I watched this video, and about 3 seconds later, she actually passes out, and she's totally gone. And the other person is just having a blast, just laughing at her. In fact, it turns out that passing out on a roller coaster is a bigger deal than I thought. I mean, lots of people tend to do that. So you have this common experience, a singular experience, and yet you have two very different responses. So this last week, we as a church, everybody together, I hope you were on it. If not, get back on the chapter a day reading plan. We're around day 415 right now, and we're in the book of Exodus. And so we read together Exodus 16 to 22, and it was a story of a singular reality. It was a story of a singular reality, and yet lots of different, varied responses. I took some time this last week in my Bible study to actually chart out what their experience was of what we read this last week. And here's what it would look like. In Exodus 13, the entire nation is on a high. They have just escaped slavery from this brutal Pharaoh, and 1 to 2 million people have escaped. They are on this natural high. There is hope, there's expectation, there's emotion. Everything is up and to the right. But as soon as they get out into the desert and they look ahead of themselves, they see this deserty wilderness. It's tough, it's harsh, it's barren, it's a landscape that nobody would want to live in. And they look over their shoulders and they see their homes and their shelters and their jobs and their food and the water, even though they were in slavery. And suddenly it looks good, and their stomachs start to turn down here in the wilderness. They're starting to get this nauseous sort of feeling about this. But no sooner have they stepped out into this wilderness than God shows up. And now he's going to lead them personally in a pillar of cloud by day or fire by night. And so now they're back on a high because God is showing up. But as soon as this happens, they turn around, they look, and they see this deranged Pharaoh and 600 elite specialist forces riding chariots towards them, and they hit a new low point in their experience. Now it's a point of terror. So Moses rallies the people. And Carolyn taught out on this so well last weekend. And Moses proclaims to them, he says this, he says, "Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Stand firm and watch God deliver you." And so the people are rallied by this. They're inspired by this. They're reminded. They flattened the curve of fear, and they started trusting God again. But the very next thing we know is that they are trapped in a deserty cul-de-sac. They've got the army of Egypt coming at them on one side. They've got the Red Sea on the other side. And suddenly they panic. Now they've reached a new low as a new wave of terror comes over their soul. And at this point, I just want to hit the pause button for a second because I love God's response. I mean, imagine this. They're in this deserty cul-de-sac. They're trapped. They can hear the hoofbeats of these horses pounding the ground. The wheels of the chariots are roaring towards them. They can hear the soldiers screaming and yelling at them. And Moses cries out to God, and he cries out to God for help. And I love God's response. Here it is. "Why are you crying out to me?" I love that. "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on." In other words, here's what I hear in that. There's a time for prayer, and then there's a time for action. This is a time for action. Get moving and go, and I'm going to rescue you through the Red Sea. So God's power's there. Moses splits the Red Sea. They're on a new high. This is amazing experience. In fact, it's going to be one of those stories that they tell generation to generation. However, in the middle of that miracle, I am sure that the Israelites were passing through that Red Sea, and they're looking on either side, and they're looking at these massive waves, and they had to have been asking, what if? What if whatever's holding those waves up lets go? What if I'm at the back of the line and I don't get through in time? What if we hit a soft spot and it starts we start getting stuck? What if? And so you can be sure that they stumbled in their hope, and it was one of those kind of drops in their hope moments. But they finally make it through to the other side. They're on dry ground. They're back up at the top. It's amazing. And then by Exodus 15, they emotionally and spiritually roll into the platform. They're back down to the platform. It's like, whew. And you can just imagine the Israelites, right? They're reaching to undo their seatbelts, to get the shoulder straps off. They're checking the doors on the roller coaster, like, okay, this thing is finally over. The only problem is the seatbelts aren't letting go, and the shoulder straps aren't letting go. However, as they're sitting there for a few minutes, over the PA system, they hear Moses and Miriam singing a song of victory in this chapter, and it's chapter 15, and it's a great chapter. It's a great song of victory. So you can imagine they kind of sit back and relax for a moment. They can't get their seatbelt off, but they're relaxing in the wafting of this song. And before they know what hits them, they slingshot out of that platform. They are heading up and to the right, skyward again. All they can see is clouds, and God is going to lead them out again. God's leading them. He's going to lead them out of the wilderness, and they're thinking, hey, this is going to be awesome. We're heading towards the promised land. However, by verse 22 of chapter 15, They're dying of thirst. They hit a new low. What was supposed to be a divine rescue has turned into this dry and waterless walk in the desert, and they start grumbling. They start grumbling so bad. Moses goes to God, and God instructs him, hey, listen, I want you to throw a stick in this bitter water, and it's going to turn sweet. And sure enough, it's another miracle. It's a miracle. It's a high point. The water turns sweet. Another disaster has been averted. However, they just got through that one, and in chapter 16, there's no food. The grocery stores have ran out of food. The shelves are empty. The stockpiles have disappeared. The distribution lines aren't working, and they find themselves in a very, very desperate place. Once again, Moses goes to God. And God says, I'm going to do a miracle. I'm going to send you quail at night and sweet bread in the morning. And sure enough, God does this miracle, and they're back up on this crazy high, celebrating once again. Anybody beginning to feel a little bit nauseous? Anybody beginning to feel a little bit like, wow, this is a crazy ride? Well, hang on, because it's not over. In Exodus 17, they find themselves again without water. But at this time, a near riot is starting to break out. In fact, what is happening is the people are beginning to grumble, and they are beginning to, all the goodwill is kind of gone. You know, at the beginning of a crisis, you're going to hear a lot of this. You're going to hear a lot of, hey, we're all in this together. We're going to get through this. This is, you know what, we can manage this. This is going to be okay. At the beginning of a crisis, there's a lot of patience. I'm hearing of people, how the social patterns are changing. People are waving to one another and saying hi and being kind to one another. There's this resolve. There's a lot of, hey, let's check in with one another and make sure we're okay. But as a crisis drags on, and the more of these loops you go on, the more you're going to feel complaining and grumbling and quarrels and criticizing. In fact, it gets so bad that they actually want to kill Moses. They want to kill their leader. The guy who rescued them and helped them through all of this, they want to stone him and kill him. And this becomes a new low point, especially in the life of Moses. But God instructs Moses to strike a rock, and water comes out of a rock, and now they're back up on a high. And this is amazing, another miracle. However, by the end of the chapter, the Amalekites now are attacking. They want to wipe out the Israelites. And you can just imagine, you know, the Israelites are holding onto their stomach because they're really starting to feel sick by all this. And you need to actually brace yourself for what's next, because this next little run is crazy. Moses raises his hands, and Joshua and the fighters and the soldiers are winning. Moses lowers his hands, and soldiers start dying. He raises his hands because he's got some strength again, and Joshua's winning, and they got the victory. They're taking ground, but he gets tired, and he lowers his hands, and people start dying, and they start losing ground. This goes on, and you got this crazy cycle until God finally wins the battle for them. It's another high point. However, there's casualties in this battle, and one of the casualties in the battle is Moses. He's exhausted. He is so depleted, and there are so many demands on this leader, so he's at a new low. They might lose their leader now. A little while ago, they wanted to kill him. Now they might lose him. And God sends Jethro as a leadership coach and consultant, and they begin to work on this sustainable leadership system, all based on small groups, mind you. Very interesting how they divide into small groups and they look after one another. And by chapter 19, 20, 21 through to 24, they're back at the platform. Back in another platform, and this is what we've been reading even today, where God is giving commands and he's giving laws and he's letting them know how they are to live. Now, again, they're reaching for their seatbelt, saying this ride has got to be over. But the seatbelt's not letting loose. And in the coming days, we're going to read more of this crazy roller coaster. So this is Israel's shared reality. This is their shared reality. And as I was reading that this week, I asked myself some very personal questions. And here were some of the questions that I asked myself. I wonder, what is my response to this pandemic going to be? Am I going to end up seasick on this crazy journey? Like, how am I personally going to manage my responsibilities, the decisions I need to make, my management of church, my own personal finances, my emotions, my health, my social distancing? How am I going to do, and how well are my emotions going to do through this? Am I going to be screaming in terror inside? Emotionally and spiritually? Am I going to pass out on this crazy roller coaster that we're all on right now? Because it's a shared experience. It's a crazy roller coaster of news and case and death counts and closures and market reports and disruptions. We're all in this shared reality. And we're all strapped into this crazy roller coaster right now. But I'm asking myself, is my response predetermined? I mean, is it just going to happen the way it happens? Or do I actually have a way of choosing my response? Is there any choice we have when we're in a crisis? Or are we just locked into this crisis and we have no choice? Now, let me just say that I don't think telling someone, just have faith. You're a Christian, trust in God. Look on the bright side. I don't think any of those statements, either to anybody else or to myself, are going to do any good. I don't think those statements are going to help us in any way at all. It would be like somebody saying, just don't get seasick. Go on a cruise, but don't get seasick. Go on a roller coaster, but just don't scream in terror and pass out. As if we can almost control that. And yet, on the other hand, at the very same time, it's saying, it's sort of like asking the question, if a fighter pilot starts getting motion sick, or if an astronaut starts getting motion sickness or air sickness, is there anything they can do? Or are they just done? If they're maybe a top fighter pilot, but they begin developing motion sickness, are they done because they have no choice? Or is there something that can be done? Well, it turns out there's something that can be done. This last week, I was reading an article in Air and Space, and it's got an interesting name. The name of the article was Barfology. Okay, so don't be too grossed out, but it was Barfology, and it was a whole scientific study on motion sickness and on throwing up. And what it studied was not normal people driving cars. It studied these elite aircraft pilots, these elite fighter pilots and astronauts. And I won't read the whole statement, but it basically said that in the early days of the astronaut program, nobody really registered getting sick. About 35% of astronauts got sick during the Apollo program. But here's what was most interesting. It is estimated that 80 to 90% of shuttle crew members experience symptoms of motion sickness. And it turns out that fighter pilots, especially elite fighter pilots, when they get into a simulator, they'll often end up throwing up. They get completely sick, and these are the best of the best of the best. So how do they deal with it? Do they just take it because that's how they're going to respond? No. Actually, it turns out what they do is they train themselves out of motion sickness. Can you believe that? You can train yourself out of motion sickness. You can train yourself for the crisis. How do they do it? And how are we going to do it? Is there anything we can do to train for the current crisis that we're experiencing? And I would have to say from our study in Exodus this last week that, yes, there's some stuff that we can do today to train so that we don't just respond in a unhealthy way, but we can actually train ourselves with more resilience. Here's point number one. I got 4 of them for you real quick. Point number 1 is this: turn worry into worship. Turn worry into worship. One of the most common themes that emerges from the book of Exodus is a statement that God says over and over and again. He says, then you will know that I am the Lord your God. And it appears so many times. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. And one of the reasons that the people kept getting emotionally and spiritually nauseous is because they kept forgetting that God was God, and they kept looking to their circumstances and to their problems and to their challenges and to their issues more than they looked to God. Same experience, 2 different responses. And the response that they were having is, when you worry, you actually end up worshiping your circumstances. When you worry, you're worshiping your imagination of worst case scenario. When you're worrying, you're worshiping your challenges and everything else rather than God. And so what we need to do is we need to very, very strategically replace worry with worship. Now, on our app, we've actually created a whole new app, a whole new experience for you that's going to help you during these days. And we have a button on there called Replace Worry with Worship Playlist. And so here's my challenge to you. When you feel worry beginning to churn up inside of you, do not give it room, do not give it space, do not give it air, do not feed it. Rather, take some time to replace it with worship, and watch how your response, how the nausea, the spiritual, emotional nausea begins to deplete because you have replaced worry with worship. Number 2, turn disruption into discovery. We're all having the same experience, but we get to choose 2 different responses to it. Every single one of us is experiencing massive disruption. Now, some of us, it's just an inconvenience. For some of us, it's really just sort of annoying and it's just not ideal. For some of us, it becomes a little bit more troubling. And then there are some of us right now or in the coming weeks that are going to experience disruption that could be described as nothing less than horrendous, horrifying. I mean, it's happening all around the world right now, and it's going to happen to some of us as well. And I'm afraid to say that I don't think it's going to get better really quick. I think it's probably going to get worse. This roller coaster ride is probably going to get a little more crazy before it gets better. But those who manage crisis well, they turn disruptions into discoveries. Very quickly, they look in that disruption for an opportunity to learn, to grow, to stretch, to improve, to discover. And here's what I can tell you. There is something that God has for you to discover, even in the midst of this disruption, even if it's one of those very troubling, very, very difficult disruptions. God has something for you to discover. It's fresh. There's going to be something that he wants you to discover that is made to strengthen you. It might even, for some of you, it might even be somewhat exciting. It's going to be something you did not see. So my encouragement to you is don't waste this shutdown. Don't waste the quiet time. Don't waste the stay-at-home order. Don't waste the space that you have, but rather ask God, what do you want me to discover? Even in this moment. You know, it was interesting. These are really small, but one of my daughters took up macrame or something. She's making these pot holders. I've never seen her do that before. And it's like she's using her time to do something productive with her hands. It's different. The other night, we broke out the Monopoly game. I don't remember the last time we had a family Monopoly night, and it was awesome. We discovered some stuff that, and these are just tiny little examples, but there's something in this. When you will be more healthy if you take whatever disruption comes your way and you try to turn it into a discovery. Number 3, turn complaining into cheering. During a crisis, your primal emotion is going to be to try and gain control. And one of the ways we try to gain control is with our words and our emotions. And when we're feeling out of control, we try to gain control, and we actually turn into being a bit of a porcupine fish. Now, at first, it's sort of like 1 minute we're swimming through the water, and life is good. You know, we're calm, we're relaxed, everything is good. And the next minute, something sets us off, and we look a lot more like this. That's what we turn into. And we turn into this prickly porcupine, some call it a blowfish or a puffer fish. And when we feel threatened, and like the puffer fish, when they feel threatened, they double in size and they get really spiny and porcupine-like. In fact, some species, we're told, actually have a venom in them or a poison in them that is 1,200 times more toxic than cyanide. And we do that with our words. We do that with our attitudes. Watch. In fact, I bet you if you rewound the tape on this last week, there were porcupine fish moments for you. Moments where you became prickly. Moments when you poked somebody, you got defensive, and you didn't even know why, and you don't want to, but you couldn't help yourself. And so there's a trigger mechanism that happens during crisis. It's an attempt to get control, to not be devoured when we're threatened, and you're going to complain, and you're going to criticize, you're going to lash out, you're going to say things out of insensitivity that you do not mean. And so this is one of those areas where the Israelites, they failed miserably. On every page, they're complaining and they're criticizing. And so during crisis, my encouragement is monitor your emotions, monitor your words, and really, really work hard to keep the quills in. And when you do poke those quills out, go to that person quickly and say, hey, I'm sorry, I just had a porcupine fish moment. I just had a blowfish moment. I'm sorry, would you forgive me? And you just deflate. Okay, so I wanted to encourage you to use that kind of language. And instead of complaining, find something to celebrate. Because in every situation, there's something there to celebrate. There's somebody to cheer on. And so you can do that. Now, finally, the last point is this. Turn fear into faith. Now, I know Carolyn taught this out so well last weekend. It was great. But it emerges again as another theme this week. The Israelites, they kept looking at the walls of water. The Israelites, they kept looking at the armies. They kept looking at the chariots. They kept looking at the empty grocery shelves. They kept looking at the empty water jugs. They kept looking at the deserty, parched landscape. They kept looking at the bad news that was coming to them, and they forgot all about the God who was ready to rescue them. And so I want to encourage you not to forget about the God who wants to rescue you. We don't fear. We don't fear even, and this isn't just bravado, this is something you've been training for your whole life. Your whole time of coming to church every weekend. Do you realize that in the last 5 or 10 years, every Sunday or Saturday night service you've come to, every small group you've gone to, where you've opened the Word of God, you have been training for this moment. Training for this moment. And what we do is we don't fear, because instead we realize that God is never surprised or caught off guard. God isn't surprised or caught off guard by this pandemic. He knows exactly what's going on, and He knows the way through this. We don't fear because God is our protector, strong and mighty. We don't fear because our God is omniscient and omnipotent. He's all-knowing and all-powerful. We don't fear because He promises never to leave us or forsake us. I mean, we might be locked in our homes, we might be feeling really distant and alone, but God is right there with us. We don't fear because God's our refuge. We've learned that over the years. We don't fear because God told us that fear is an enemy that is going to try and sabotage your faith and trust. So we have our eyes open for fear, and we say, nope, not going to let it happen. We don't fear because we realize that fear is putting hope in the wrong place. Fear is actually worshiping the wrong God. We don't fear because we have direct access to the throne of God with our prayers. We don't fear because God promises that nothing will ever separate us from His love and care. We don't fear because He has offered to be with us in times of difficulty. We don't fear because we are more than overcomers. We don't fear because He has promised us hope beyond the challenges of today. And because we know God personally, and because we have His Word. And so we hang on, rather than fearing, we hang on to this. Don't worry about anything. Philippians 4, don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank Him for all that He has done. Don't forget everything He's done in your life or up to this point. That was what the Israelites did. They forgot what God had done, and they forgot His miracles, and they get into the next valley and they pretend like God's left them. Don't forget what God has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. We're all going to be sharing the same experience or reality. It's a crazy roller coaster. But we're going to have different responses. And we can choose and train ourselves for a godly response. And one of the reasons we can do that, where we get our energy and our hope for, is because hope has a name. And His name is Jesus Christ.